Chasing Naruto Chapter 7. Naruto's Perspective. I was running through a tunnel, in pursuit of the two-tailed beast. Hinata was right behind me. It was our first mission as official members. "Keep her busy," I said, "I need to gather my sage chakra." Hinata rushed past me to distract the blonde female. It was a dead end ahead, a trap. I stood completely still and gathered my sage chakra. I heard an explosion. Yugito had collapsed the tunnel ahead of me. I punched and the rocks shattered. 2 blows later and I was through. I pulled a tri-pronged kunai from my belt and threw it at the other. Jinchuriki. The blade scratched her, that was all I would need. The seal had transferred from the knife to Yugito's person. I teleported next to her, and punched. She dodged my fist by half an inch. She was skilled, but I was in sage mode, she wasn't even in the same league. The natural energy around my fist hit her, and sent her flying to Hinata. Hinata was waiting for this, and started her gentle fist combo. Yugito collapsed into the nearby water. She, however, was smiling. I pulled Hinata back just in time. Yugito set the two tails loose. A barrage of fireballs caused the surrounding walls to explode, revealing the sewer to the entire village. I made eye contact with the beast and entered its mindscape. Yugito's mindscape was a creepy and pulsing place, much like the stomach of a toad, but it was purple with many different colored dots throughout. Yugito tore off the seal that kept the cat back and it walked out menacingly. I mentally called for my mistress. Kyubi appeared next to me in a huff and then identified her surroundings. She sauntered up to the cat and flicked it on the nose. It flew backwards and the fire that it seemed to be made of faded, revealing what seemed to be a child with blue hair, blue clothes and odd, different colored eyes. Most tailed beasts, for one reason or another, had been messed up by someone mentally, turning them into a monster. The two tails had been driven into insanity young, it seemed. Q patted its head, and then sent me out of the mindscape. Yugito was staring up at me in amazement, and I hit the back of her neck, knocking her out cold. Now that Yugito had destroyed the seal, the removal was all too easy, and done quickly. "We need to get out of here," Hinata notified. "There are 3 battalions of lightning ninja headed our way." I nodded and hurled Yugito over my shoulder. I grabbed Hinata and we teleported away in a flash of yellow light. The leader awaited us back at the hideout. He looked over at us and said, "Very good, you took her down very quickly. She is still alive, I presume?" I nodded, and the leader's face visibly relaxed. I hurled Yugito to the ground and the statue was summoned. I leapt up to my assigned spot and started to donate chakra to the leader's jutsu. Because of the beast's state, it took no longer than an hour to remove it. After the jutsu was completed, I picked up Yugito and brought her to my chamber. Hinata followed me, we set her down on my bed, and I sighed. "So, what are we going to do with her?" Hinata asked. "There are a few options available to us," I responded. "We could send her back to her village. They would have no use for a broken weapon, we both know how that Raikage guy thinks." "Then what do you suggest?" "Well, you know how Master Itachi is sick?" "Duh." I rolled my eyes and said, "Look, what I am getting to is that he has planned out how he is going to die, to the smallest detail, and he sort of let me in on the plan. He has measures to pull the strings of everybody else to put everyone in the exact place he wants. Maybe we should start planning for the future too." "I agree, but what could this empty shell of a ninja do for us?" "She provides us a way out of the Akatsuki should we fail our mission and somehow survive." "Ah, we were trying to help the hosts." "Clever. This is kind of sudden. Do you really think that we'll not be able to pull it off?" "No, I think we'll pull it off. It is just that, so far, I have heard 3 people come up with a way to ensure peace. Pervy Sage said peace will come through understanding one another. Itachi said that peace will come through individual sacrifice, and I was listening to the leader once a couple years ago. He thinks that peace will be brought about through fear and an understanding of true pain. I am not sure which one is the true path to peace. It is more likely that we'll be wrong before we're right." "You're a regular ray of sunshine, aren't you?" "We have gotten 4 of the 9-tailed beasts under our control, not counting my own. I don't know what the leader plans, but I think it is going to be violent in nature. This act could be a kindness to Yugito and it could save our hides from criminal charges." "I see your point, but be careful, for me?" I smiled to myself. Careful was my middle name. I packed Yugito's body in a frog, and put a scroll in her hand. The scroll contained a note letting Tsunade know what we planned to do with the girl, and then I gave her permission to come up with whatever kind of story she wanted as to how she got the girl. I sent it all away inside. Hinata had left once I had started to write the letter, so I was alone, and decided a massage was in order. I changed into my bathrobe and flip-flops and went to Churn's room. I picked up her bracelets and tossed them into the water. Churn motioned for me to come into the water, and I did. She brought me under, forming a bubble around my mouth to breathe, and she cleaned me up and then changed the temperature of the water to ice and stretched different areas. Eventually, when she was finished, she let me float up to the surface and I just floated there for a while. I had so much to do, and things were going by so fast lately. I decided an efficient use of time would be to make a to-do list. Search Sound Village hideouts to pick up any prisoners that would be useful sleepers, and destroy anything too dangerous. Archive all of Orochimaru's forbidden jutsu. Extract any additional tailed beasts that the leader wanted me to train. Get Hinata something for Valentine's. Become an official member of the Akatsuki. Stay sexy. I put those last two on there to cheat a bit, because then I laughed because it looked like I had already done two of the things I had needed to do. I walked over to my map, and I took off Yugito Ni's red pin. I grabbed 5 white pins and plugged them into the spots of Orochimaru's lairs. One of the said hideouts was near the Land of Waves, and that meant that Hinata's favorite chocolate shop was nearby. I put on my mesh shirt, my overshirt, compression shorts, pants, Anbu armor, sheathed my sword and pulled on my Akatsuki robes. I grabbed my reed hat and went over to Hinata's room. She was just pulling on her own robes. I nodded to her and she rushed out to follow me. It was quite the walk, and since we didn't want to attract any unwanted attention, we just walked through as slow as any pedestrians. Eventually we came upon the Land of Waves, and in the morning fog, we left the land and started to walk on the water to the island hideout. The place was contained by a gigantic steel door, locked and rusted shut. Hinata made short work of it, and we walked in. It was a prison. Hinata was the one who knew the sleeper jutsu, so she hand-picked her favorites and we released the others. Eventually I came upon the jutsu library, and started to systematically take and log them. Leader would be pleased. Once I was done, Hinata burst into the room, dragging a redhead by the hair. That looks like it hurts, I remarked. I hope it does. What did she do? She has been keeping these people here. They thought Orochimaru was still alive. They didn't know that they belonged to the Akatsuki now. I set most of them free, but those that I kept are amazing specimens. But what did she do to you that was so bad? She called me an ugly whore. I grabbed Hinata, pulled her close and kissed her hard. Her lips were so very soft, and her hands looped around my neck, as my own reached around her waist. She got a little bit into it and pressed herself against me, and I kissed her deeper. After a good 30 seconds, I needed air, so I broke the kiss. Hinata was a bit flustered, but she didn't look at our guest. I walked over to this redhead, and made her look me in the eyes and I said, I love that girl behind me, more than anybody will ever love you. If you ever say anything that gives her the impression that you are not worshipping her, she will tell me and I will kill you slowly and painfully, got it? She spat in my face, so I slapped her, hard. I drew on a bit of red chakra and pulled her face up to mine. She gasped, and I smiled. Then I did one of Itachi's favorite genjutsu, he called it the wool breaker. It made her think her bones were on fire, and feel that pain. After 10 seconds I let up, 5 more and she would be totally insane instead of scarred, which was what I wanted. Hinata was blushing furiously, and I smirked at her, and she blushed harder. That was when one of the prisoners went berserk. He had the ability to turn into water and he seeped in under the door and formed up. He shouted, finally, a bit of fresh air. Karen. I thought you'd be here. I have come to pay you back, you see, for all the experiments you have performed on me. Payback is a bitch. He turned himself into water and proceeded to drown the girl. I looked over at Hinata and saw that she had an evil glint in her eye. I got out of the way. She was about to make this poor sap her slave. The guy finished killing that cretin and faced us. Hinata flew through some hand signs and then formed a chakra needle from her index finger, and then jammed said needle into the guy's forehead. His eyes glazed over and he was hers. His name is Suigetsu, she told me. He was trained to use the shinobi swords. I can use him. The blade of flickering splendor, he will use it. It was a thoughtful gift, but a tad bit too big for me to use. It'll suit him just fine. Okay, cool, whatever makes you happy, I responded. We left the hideout with our individual profits. I suggested we head over to the market, and Hinata agreed. She loved shopping. I knew that I would end up carrying a boatload of crap, but I would be able to sneak a box of chocolate in there somewhere along the way. When we reached the outskirts of town, we disguised ourselves to look like us, but in casual wear. I did not think anybody would recognize me. I was wrong, stupid wrong. Only I could have been this wrong. As I was struggling to carry an already respectable mountain of stuff, I noticed 4 people following us. I snapped my fingers and stretched my neck backwards, careful to be casual. The veins around Hinata's eyes revealed themselves and she whispered, "Konoha Anbu, we are in such trouble if we don't get the hell out of here, like, now." I could drop this stuff and run, but escape would be unlikely. I could seal it in a scroll and fight them, but that would send only more Anbu later. I needed to get rid of them and keep them away. "Oh crap," Hinata whispered, "we are totally surrounded, 16 enemies total. They are herding us towards the main square, we can't fight there, too many civilians, we wouldn't know who was attacking." "Shit, what do we do?" I asked, "Aren't you the strategist?" "Well, you could just give up." Someone near our right said. Yu Gao, she had 3 more friends, that put the enemy count at 20 of Konoha's best. "I just knew I should have stayed home today." "Or, you could fight," she said, "and you will be arrested or killed. The wave authorities know what we are going to do. They left you out to dry, Naruto. We need to talk about your true intentions and your gift from the other day. We know how you fight, we have a strategy to neutralize any new jutsu, and we outnumber you 10 to 1. They didn't know how I fought now, but they did know the Jinan from 3 years ago, which means they have a plan laid out just for him. I, however, was not that Jinan, but the best way to see how to screw up a trap is to spring it without putting yourself in any real danger. I would play right into it, and then take all of the elements that made it a trap away from them when they cornered me, using completely different tactics. I grabbed Hinata's arm and said, "Multi-shadow clone jutsu." Thousands of me and Hinata pairings shot off in every which way. Yu Gao had locked onto the real me, however, and followed behind us. Eventually we came to the Great Naruto Bridge. I stopped there, and dropped my disguise. Hinata followed suit. Yu Gao's team and 2 other teams touched down on the bridge. Someone came flying up behind me and swiped down with a very sharp sword. I got far enough forward that it only cut my robe all the way down the back instead of crippling me. I drew my own sword, disarmed the bold fellow and then used his own sword to disembowel him. I turned and engaged Yu Gao. She was skilled with a sword, no doubt she had learned from Hayate. I kept up the onslaught on her so she wouldn't notice Hinata knocking out one of every 4 out, and killing the rest. She would use the gentle fist to knock the first one out, and then proceed to use her own sword to contain and then slash her opponents to ribbons. Eventually, Yu Gao used a special ninjutsu on her sword, turning it red and about 7 feet long, and charged me. I blocked the blade, but my own sword snapped in half. I replaced myself with a shadow clone and disguised myself as a pedestrian. Yu Gao took care of the shadow clone quick and began to look for me. I grabbed a tri-pronged kunai and threw it at her. She caught it, and her eyes widened. I formed a Rasengan and teleported next to her. As I shoved the ball of chakra into her torso I shouted, "Flying Thunder God Rasengan combo." Yu Gao flew backwards and spun until she smacked heavily onto a metal pillar. Hinata began sealing away her prizes and I walked up to my target. She was bleeding internally, and almost unconscious. She would die soon without medical treatment. I made her look at me and I smiled. "I was only toying with you today, you saw what I can do, and I haven't even broke a sweat. Don't fuck with me, tell Tsunade that." She passed out, and I summoned a frog, which took her to the Konoha hospital. Tsunade should have known better. It would look suspicious if I were to talk to Yu Gao. Zetsu was always watching. We got back to the base at top speed, and I helped Hinata bring her new toys into her research area. The 5 Anbu as well as Suigetsu were placed into large cylindrical glass containers, filled with preservative fluids. They would be kept in a virtual coma until Hinata decided how they would best serve our interests. Once that was done, I filed all of the interesting jutsu in the new Akatsuki jutsu library. When I returned to my room, a frog was sitting on my bed. He handed me a note, saluted and then disappeared. I unfolded the sheet of paper. "Hey Naruto. Wanted you to know that I explained to Tsunade what she did wrong, won't happen again, and I wanted to check in with you, make sure you're not crazy. We'll have to get together again soon, cause I have some stuff I need to tell you, and Tsunade wants to go this time. I told her you will refuse, of course, but she insists I ask. I heard about the sword, Itachi has a new one, we both think will work better for you, go see him when you get the chance. I know you will be pleased with it, later. The gallant J." I threw the note in the fireplace and went to go see Itachi. He was casually making some food in the kitchen. He washed his hands, set the table for 2, and motioned for me to sit. I did. "So, you hear from Jay yet?" he asked. I nodded and Itachi said, Good, so here is your new weapon. He reached out from under the table and tossed me a sheathed sword. It was slightly unusual because it had no hilt or anything remotely close to a hilt. It was like a sheet of metal, sharpened to a point at one end, and the other had a wrapped area meant to be where I gripped. At the end of the grip was a hoop, with a chain attached to it. On the end of the chain was the whirlpool symbol I used to wear on all my clothes. It had a leather sheath, which was obviously custom made, and it held the blade in with a strap at the top that would reach over the blade, and it had a button on the other side to keep it tight. I noticed immediately that the blade was a bit thin, and then Itachi began to speak. Well, that blade is made for you. It is rather thin. This is because it makes it ideal for wind chakra enhancement. If you put a bit of your wind chakra into it, you should be able to cut through diamonds, so just be careful what you do with it, okay? I nodded and then noticed that Itachi had finished cooking prime rib, his specialty. I devoured it and then left to get some well-deserved shut-eye. I slept until noon the next day. When I woke up, everybody was gone. Itachi, Kisame, Hidan, and Kakazu. I eventually found Hinata in the training room, hugging her knees, crying. I dashed up to her, and checked for injuries. She was physically fine. What is the matter? I cried. It's Itachi. He told me this morning he was putting his plan into action. His plan to die. So soon? How could he be sure Sasuke was even ready? I hugged Hinata and whispered to her that it was all going to be all right. Itachi had been a hard taskmaster, but we had ended up loving him all the more for it. He was like a father to us. I rubbed her back and she calmed down. I carried her over to her room and we just held each other, and tried to make sense of it all. Eventually, someone knocked on the door. It was Konan. She looked at us, and one of her eyebrows arched. Were you two just? I don't want to know. The leader wants you two to go after the Six Tails. We recently figured out where he is staying. The Tsushigomo clan, I believe, is taking care of him. You need to use this opportunity to capture him, while he isn't moving. She picked up the red pin from my map and moved it to a point in the nearby land of grass. He is here, go now, and take him alive. She turned on her heel and left. I turned to Hinata and said, well, I guess there is no rest for the wicked, let's go. We traveled for many days and nights, and eventually we came upon a stone pillar in the middle of nowhere. Hinata activated her Byakugan and looked around. There are traps everywhere, we need to be careful, okay? I nodded and she led me on a long and winding path up. On the top was a hut, a pond and a small fort. We walked up to the hut and knocked carefully. An old man opened the door. Are you back? Sorry, I thought you were someone else. How did you get past all the traps? We received a warning from a friend, Hinata responded, and then she brought out a picture of the Six Tails host. Have you seen this man? He called us urgently here, and we owe him a favor. Do you know where he is? Utakata? He went off with Hotari and that squad of ninja from Konoha, the guy team. They were an enthusiastic bunch, those ninjas. Thanks for the info, can you point us in the right direction? The old man pointed north, and we dashed that direction. As we ran, we came upon a squad of mist hunter nins. I drew my sword and channeled wind chakra into it and sliced off 2 heads in one swing, took another one from left shoulder to right hip and the last one I cut down right in half. I hated hunter ninjas, mostly because I knew what it was like to be hunted. We started running again, but something began to feel off. Hey, Hinata, the natural energy around here, it's moving in the direction we're heading, and gathering up ahead, something's up, we need to keep aware. Hinata nodded and picked up the pace. Soon, we arrived to see Guy, Tenten and Neji facing off against a horde of villagers. They were fighting to outlast them, so I assumed the villagers were not fighting of their own volition. Well, that and that they were drooling and no longer had any color in their eyes. I continued to follow the natural energy. In a set of ruins, not far from the village, Lee, Utakata, a strange man and a girl were facing off. The girl had some huge purple metal thing poking out of her back and no color in her eyes, just like the villagers, so she was probably the Hotari character the old man talked about. Lee shouted at Utakata, "You're her master, you cannot just let her get used like this, Sir Utakata. She carries a bit of you inside her, it is your duty, you must stop wandering." Utakata flinched and then his gaze hardened. The other man laughed and then released something. White natural energy exploded out from the girl, and I lost my balance and fell. I drew my sword and 4 of my special kunai. I threw them at each of the people involved in this fight. First I knocked out Lee, then the nameless guy, then I tossed Hotari to Hinata and I faced Utakata. We are from the organization called Akatsuki, We are here to bring you in so we can take away that monster inside you. We can do this the easy way, or the hard way. He picked the hard way, they all do. The idea of using my sage chakra around the girl made me nervous, so I didn't do it. Instead, I pulled out 4 tails of red chakra. I shouted, "Tailed Beast version 2." I was in complete control of the chakra that usually would act of its own accord. I had gained the ability to control my mistress's chakra over time. Now, I was a pro. The guy's eyes widened, and I charged up and shot the beam attack that comes naturally to tailed beasts. Utakata had gotten just barely out of the way, but the rubble above him fell down, and landed on his legs. He struggled to break free, but it didn't work. I walked over to him and smacked his head with the ring on the end of my sword. I dragged him out from under the rubble, to find Hinata playing with the metal in Hotari's back. Eventually, she got it to open up. She pulled out a crystal. She rushed through a couple symbols and summoned a frog. She scribbled something down and patted the frog on the head and handed it the note. The frog puffed away. She was going to have the crystal studied by the experts of natural energy. Then Team Guy rolled up. They saw Lee down, and looked at us. Neji, thinking quickly, used wind to blow the hats off our heads. They stared for a second, and then Tenten and Guy charged. Hinata flew into a rage, and dashed after Neji. I delivered a solid blow to Guy's face, and countered Tenten's staff. I wrenched her neck the wrong way, and it snapped. I yanked my sword free from its sheath and stabbed Guy right in the heart. Someone kicked me. It had to have been Lee, because I recognized he was performing the primary lotus. I grabbed his hand from behind his back, turned and grabbed his other hand, and then flipped myself and Lee with me, and threw him into a rock. Lee tried to move, but I drew a kunai and stabbed him in the kidneys and then the liver. He would bleed out. Hinata was holding Neji in the air by his neck, and she dropped him. "I won't kill you, cousin, you must suffer as I have." She dropped him and knocked him out. He would wake up too late to do anything for his team. I wrenched my sword from Guy's chest and cleaned it off on his clothes. Guy grabbed my collar and pulled me to his face and asked, "Why? Naruto? Why did you leave us, Naruto?" Hinata killed the guy who had been using Hotari and we were on our way, Utakata on my shoulder. We left Hotari on the ground, the only other survivor besides Neji. We stole the beast from Utakata and I secretly took him back to where we had left Hotari. She was still there, crying, so I dropped into the clearing. She saw me and Utakata, and I dropped him on the floor. I turned and ran away full tilt. She couldn't know that I felt so badly, I wouldn't let her see the tears. When we got back, the leader called a meeting. We met using the astral projection jutsu. "Well, I have good news and bad news," he said. "The good news is, there are only 3 more hosts for us to capture. The bad news, Hidan and Kakazu are dead." My jaw dropped. Kakazu had essentially 5 lives and Hidan was immortal. The leader continued, "I am sending Itachi and Kisame after the 4 tails and Naruto and Hinata after the 7 tails. I will be sending Zetsu as backup for Kisame and Tobi will be backup for you, Naruto." My head was pounding, we were short 2 members. I nodded to show that I understood and I walked out. I needed to sleep. The next day, Hinata woke me up and said, "Hey, look, I talked to Tobi, he understands that you need a break, we have the next 2 days off for Tobi to get over to us anyways, so take it easy, that's an order." I got up and ate, read some new jutsu scrolls, and spent the remainder of the day in the hot springs. On the second day I snuck out to the nearby village and bought Hinata a box of chocolate for Valentine's Day. Then I collapsed again, dead tired. When I woke up on the 3rd day, Tobi was waiting for us. He waved enthusiastically. "Hey guys," he shouted, "oh man, this is so exciting, to work with Naruto and Hinata, the demon himself and the bloody Valentine, I can't wait." His screechy voice was already giving me a headache. I nodded and he just kept on talking and talking. I don't know how Zetsu handled it. I would have to ask him myself. Eventually we started off, and were quickly headed after the 7 tails. Halfway to the waterfall village, we got word from a seagull that the 7 tails was seeking sanctuary in Konoha and was en route at that very moment. We quickened the pace considerably. Hinata activated her Byakugan and we just kept running. Eventually Hinata said, "Got her, she is on her own," and heading towards a group of Konoha ninja, Sasuke, and that Yugito character. "Tobi, you're with me, Hinata, take care of our target, we'll take care of Sasuke," I said. "He is 2 kilometers east of us right now." I bounded off to the east. Eventually I found him and jumped down behind him. He dashed forwards and turned around. "I'd hoped they'd send you, Naruto, we need to talk, You have some explaining to do, about Yugito, about the other hosts, about Team Guy and your real loyalties. I don't care to answer you, all that I care about is that I get to kill you today. If I did, then Itachi wouldn't have to die for no good reason. Sasuke wasn't worthy of Itachi. And Itachi would be mad at me, but he would be alive. I drew my sword. Chasing Naruto Chapter 8. Sasuke's perspective. Yugito was a blonde, attractive female ninja, with quite the attitude. She was extremely independent, and wanted nothing to do with me. Probably the reason I thought she was so alluring. But she and I were assigned to work together. So I had checked in on her every day while she recovered from her battle with Naruto. Whenever I asked her about the battle, she nearly had a panic attack, and from what I gathered from her past, she was a battle-hardened veteran, which meant that Naruto had probably toyed with her and then punched in the reality of the difference in power. One day, as I went to check in on her, she was dressed in her lightning shinobi wear, waiting. I noticed that she wasn't wearing her lightning headband, but she wasn't wearing a Konoha one either. She looked up at me, her cool, blue eyes, and I immediately felt the force of her personality. I'm ready to train now, she said. Your Lady Hokage cleared me, let's head out to the training ground. I nodded and we walked to the grounds. A new Jinan team was going through some basic teamwork missions together against their master. It was Konohamaru's squad. It reminded me of Naruto, and those days we had spent together, that while I hadn't enjoyed them then, I looked back on them with a certain amount of fondness. Yugito saw me stop and looked on to the exercise. So, she said, what is the significance of this? Don't tell me I have to start here as a Jinan. No, I said, my first squad used to do this exact drill. It was me, Sakura, Kakashi and Naruto. She flinched when I said his name and then she turned to me and said, he was on your team? Oh. That explains why. I was going to ask you why you cared so much about that guy. He's my best friend. Was. Is. He went rogue. So have you. You don't know the first thing about Naruto. I know he nearly killed me, that is enough to hate someone in my book. I didn't say anything because she didn't get it, she couldn't possibly have understood, she hadn't known him before he'd snapped. I could try to show her, so I pulled out a picture, an old one, with a smiling Naruto, myself grimacing, I hate photos, Sakura smiling and Kakashi smiling above it all. Yugito looked at it, and I handed it to her as I said, when I think of Naruto, this is the guy who I think of. Yugito looked wary, then pulled out a scroll and several colored pencils. She drew amazingly fast, and showed me a picture of a man with a shock of blonde hair, evil ice blue, vertical slit eyes, Akatsuki robes, 3 tri-pronged kunai in his right hand and a Rasengan in the other. He didn't quite have fangs, but his teeth were unnaturally sharp and there was a maniacal smile on his face. This is the creature that I think of when I hear the name Naruto. I took this scroll and said, do you mind if I show this picture to the Onbu? They'll change the picture in the bingo book. She shook her head and I sent the scroll along using a toad. We finally got to a nice open space and I turned to her, so, I have been instructed to teach you a certain jutsu. I have been feeling your chakra while you recovered, so I know that you are a lightning type and you have a great amount of chakra, even without the 2 tails. I am going to teach you how to use my own ultimate jutsu, Kirin, the thunderclap. So, first, I will demonstrate on that nearby tree, okay? Yugito nodded and sat down. I looked up, there weren't many clouds in the sky, that would change soon. I blazed through the hand signs for the first shouted, fire style, dragon flame jutsu. I shot 3 giant dragon-shaped fireballs into the sky. Clouds formed, I put a bit of lightning chakra into my hand, and the lightning form of Kirin peeked out of the clouds. I brought my hand down and Kirin flashed down and struck the tree, disintegrating it. I looked over at Yugito and she was in awe. I offered her my hand and I said, okay, so the first step is fire, do you know any fire ninjutsu? She shook her head numbly as she took my hand and I pulled her up to her feet. I was aching from doing that jutsu, so I made sure to walk slowly. I lead her to the bridge where I had learned my first fire move and I showed her the hand signs and displayed, fire style, grand fireball jutsu. The fireball was maybe 7 feet in diameter, and normally I could have done better, but I was tired. Yugito went through the signs and tried the jutsu, but only smoke emerged from her mouth. I nodded and said, try again, put more passion into it, the only way it will work. What? You're the most stoic person I know, how can you tell me to put passion into something? I am very passionate about certain things. Does that make you a pyro? I ignored her and motioned for her to repeat her effort. She sent out sparks the second try, and progressed slowly along. We started at noon, and at 6 she had a small globe of fire. I insisted we stop to find her somewhere to stay. She obliged, albeit reluctantly. She was stubborn, I liked her. We checked in at nearly 5 apartment complexes, but no cigar. Eventually Yugito stopped me and pointed over to a building nearby. It was 3 stories of small apartments, the top floor with a handmade balcony outside its door. You don't want to live there, I warned her. Why not? She asked. Because nobody lives there anymore, nobody wants to. Why? It looks perfectly good. That is where Naruto used to live. Yugito eyed me in surprise and jumped over to see it. I walked over and she was playing with the doorknob. I opened it and the door creaked open. Dust covered the place and I walked in, but I confess it felt like I was walking into a crypt. I found the bedroom. It was pretty neat, if covered in dust. On the bed was a picture, in a picture frame. I picked it up, it was the old picture of Team 7. I noticed that there were spots with less dust on them than others. They were lines going from the center down to the frame. Could they have been tear marks? I fell to my knees and I felt my grief wash over me. Yugito walked in and said, "How can you call yourself a man when you are so out of control? You know, I understand emotional men and I understand stoic men, but you're all over the place, it's disgusting. Are you hot or cold, emotional or emotionless, black or white? What are you, Sasuke Uchiha?" I thought about it. Jiraiya had once said that a person was a collection of their experiences. I had had a ton of bad stuff happen to me, and I could trace it all back to my elder brother, Itachi Uchiha. I said, an avenger. I walked out of the crypt of my best friend and at the next apartment complex I basically told the landlord he was going to rent something out to Yugito, who obliged by giving her his room. I went home, and collapsed onto my bed. There was so much I didn't understand. It was too much, but sleep always helped me think, so I drifted to oblivion. I awoke to a slight knocking noise on my door. Yugito was at the door. "Ready to start?" she asked. "Get a head start without me. I need to do some things." She nodded amicably. I just hoped she hadn't figured out the things I had to do were shower and change my clothes. She was a jonin, who was I kidding myself? I did what I had to do as fast as I could, leaving nothing out, but rushing through some things. I walked to the training ground and Yugito was waiting. She motioned for me to watch and she went through the signs and spouted a ball of flame 10 feet in diameter. I almost started clapping, but instead I walked out next to her and breezed through my own hand signs and shouted, "Fire style, dragon flame jutsu." A singular dragon shot out and swirled through the air and around us, and finally submerged in the lake. This jutsu is directed by your mind, so be careful not to focus on yourself as you do it. You'll attract your own jutsu to yourself and turn yourself into an accidental suicide bomber. She started laughing, and I realized that I could have phrased that better. It sounded like I thought it was a joke, but I was dead serious. I rolled my eyes and she laughed harder still. "What?" I asked. "You're such a dumbass." She cackled. "Do the damn jutsu." She went through the signs and shot out a dragon, which promptly crashed into a nearby tree, lighting it aflame. I stared at her in what was my best blank-eyed stare. I asked, "Really? Really? You focused on the tree? The cement is non-flammable, the water would have put it out, but you focused on the big-ass, older than you or I tree?" She burst into laughter and literally collapsed and started to roll around on the deck. I rolled my eyes and prayed to whatever god there was she wouldn't do this on the battlefield. Glad to see everyone is having fun. It was Tsunade. I looked over to her and noticed Yugito had stopped laughing and was working very hard very fast to put the tree out. Tsunade watched for a bit and then said, "Asuma's team encountered 2 Akatsuki. 2 new ones, we got intel on their moves now, but we paid a heavy price." "Don't tell me." I looked over at her, horrified. "Asuma died." I was shocked. He was going to have a baby in 4 months. "Oh shit. What about Kurenai, has anybody told her yet?" "No," Shikamaru volunteered, "so maybe she does know now, but I haven't told her yet." "So, you want me to step this process up?" "Precisely." "Oh, shit. I cursed. "That won't be easy. I can train her to use it in 3 days, but to use in combat is totally different from in training, I can tell you that much. Shit. In 3 days the response team leaves without you. So be ready or get left behind." Yugito was standing behind and to my right. "Did you catch all that?" I asked. She nodded and then turned around and started practicing. Her dragons were too small to do much damage. I egged her on, and by the end of the day, she had a nice sized jutsu ready to go. I told her to try to get 2 out at once and she barely did it, and they were pretty small. So I went and got food and soldier pills and we ate, and she fueled up again so she could keep going into the night. By midnight she could shoot 5 in one volley, fully sized. I sent her home to sleep and I caught a few hours as well. In the morning, we went down again, but this time, I explained how to attract the real lightning from the sky. It was like making your hand into an lightning rod and then redirecting the lightning bolt's trajectory to your opponent. She got the concept, but it would only take one shot for mastery, so I shot 25 dragons into the air and artificial thunderheads formed over Konoha. Yugito brought her hand up into the air and she called Kirin forth. Then she directed its fury towards the lake. Kirin flashed down and destroyed the entire lake. Nothing was left, it was totally evaporated and the sand below had turned to mere scorched earth. Yugito collapsed from the effort, but she understood the power of this move. I could see it in her eyes. I let her rest for the rest of the day while I went to Asuma's funeral. I hadn't known him very well, but he was a good man and a great ninja. Shikamaru was pretty broken up and Kurenai wouldn't stop crying. On the next day, I found that Tsunade had sent Shikamaru's squad plus Kakashi out ahead of us. The second squad would be me, Sakura, Yamato, and Yugito. We went all out to catch up to them. It took us most of the day to catch up to them, but eventually we found Kakashi cornered, Choji and Ino trying to fend off what looked like possessed surgical threads. Noticed Kakashi was specifically trying to avoid not only the crazy dude who was obviously Akatsuki, but also avoiding 2 huge monsters made out of the possessed surgical thread. Yamato and Sakura jumped in to save Ino and Choji, while I charged my sword with Chidori and sliced down the crazy man's back. I was very careful to hit his heart and other vitals. He collapsed and Kakashi pushed me off my feet and away from the body. He shouted, "The monsters will keep him alive, kill them too. Sakura, Blondie, go help Shikamaru, he's to the west of here, and fighting the other one solo." Yamato kept guard over Ino and Choji while I destroyed one creature with one well-timed strike and then lit the other one on fire. Kakashi collapsed onto a nearby tree and looked to be still slightly under the weather. I looked at Yamato and we headed over to the west to check up on Shikamaru too. He had it covered quite nicely, however. He was alone, standing over a pile of rubble, which this opponent was presumable under. He was coughing, but trying to smoke a cigarette, just like Asuma always used to do. We locked eyes and he nodded, a cool and collected mask, but I could tell he was just about ripped to shreds on the inside. We all went back to make sure that Ino and Choji were still okay. They weren't. They were pretty badly mauled and a person in Akatsuki robe stood over them. The person removed their hat to reveal long, black hair. She turned around and there was Hinata Hyuga, her hand seemingly petting a dinosaur-like creature made of lightning. "Ah, here come the people we were looking for, Silverbolt." I blurred over to her and got my fingers around her throat. I picked her up and began to choke her. "Where are Itachi and Naruto?" I demanded. She brought her right index finger to her face and pulled her eyelid down and extended her tongue out her mouth and puffed away. I found that something was still in my hand though, it was that lightning creature. Turns out, the creature actually was made of lightning. I felt over 10,000 volts of electricity go through my hand and then the rest of my body and I flew back 20 feet into a dead tree behind me. I saw my hand was burnt to the extreme and colors were flashing in front of my eyes. I heard the sounds of battle, then I felt an oppressive heat and a roar from a creature that must have been like 20 lions put together. That shook me out of my funk and I climbed out of the tree. As I regained my balance, I felt fingers wrap around my throat. Hinata lifted me into the air and said, "Funny. Is this familiar to you too? Have we done this before?" "Oh, yes we have, but the positions were reversed, weren't they? Don't turn into lightning on me now, okay? What a gentleman." She was smiling as she said those things in a powerful and confident voice, which was terrifying in its own ways. I activated my Sharingan and Hinata activated her Byakugan. "Really?" she asked me, "that's all you've got? Itachi wanted me to find out how far you'd progressed and here you are, pathetic eyes and trying to cast a genjutsu that wouldn't fool Jinan. Such a disappointment, and Itachi wanted to meet up with you at one of the old Uchiha hideouts in a month. Talk about old times, I'd imagine. But you're just not strong enough, which is why he asked me to do this to you, just in case." Her eyes swirled and left the image of Itachi's Mangekyo mixed in and then totally dominated her eyes. I was trapped in the nightmare realm, Tsukuyomi. I relived the destruction of the Uchiha and then failing to capture Naruto, and then I got to see a picture of Naruto in the middle of a fight against some random Konoha ANBU. He destroyed them and left only the leader barely alive. She dropped me and I collapsed. I heard the roar of that animal again and the flapping of wings, but then there was nothing. 3 hours later, Konoha Anbu found us. Everyone had survived, but we were all carrying new scars. I was in intensive care for several days. When I woke up, Tsunade was waiting for me. She walked in and shouted at me, "What the fuck happened to you? We really needed you in the past couple of days. What could have possibly done this to 2 entire squads of my best?" Hinata used Itachi's Sharingan. Tsunade stared at me for a long time, speechless. She sat down and held her head in her hands. "What else happened?" I asked. Naruto struck again. A lot closer to home this time than just the fire temple. "The Anbu? How did you know?" Hinata made me watch it in graphic detail. I still can't seem to grasp the implications of Hinata using the Sharingan. The old texts say that certain jutsu can be implanted in the eyes of others through the Sharingan. She was just a carrier. Sakura chose the time to burst into the door. She blurted out, "Tsunade. Neji's returned. The rest of Team Guy isn't with him. He wants to talk to you." Tsunade stood up and I did too. She looked at me disapprovingly, but I said, "You said you'd needed me the past couple days. Well, I'm here now." She sighed and started walking. Neji was in bad shape, and he saw me and then looked at Tsunade. She said, "It's okay, give your report, he's cleared." He went right into it. One of the people we were supposed to guard was close with the Six Tails host. The Six Tails was targeted by the Akatsuki during our mission. Naruto and Hinata showed up. Hinata beat me within an inch of my life, but spared me again, and Naruto killed everyone else with the exception of the host, whom they both took away. "What do you mean everyone? The target? The target's friends?" "Everyone involved except me." "You're not serious." "I have never been so serious. I can't believe she won't kill me." "From what I understand, you did the same thing to her during your first Chunin exams. She is going to play with you before she destroys you," Tsunade said. "I know. I think I'm going to start drinking." He walked out of the room and Tsunade sent Sakura to tail him. I was speechless. "Whose side is he on?" I asked. "Is he on ours? The host's? The Akatsuki's? Is he just so nuts that he is just killing people? What is going on with you, Naruto?" I shouted at him, and I knew he wasn't there, but I hoped he could feel it, my pain, my confusion, and my building hatred for these games. Tsunade looked at me and said, "You know, the only thing I can see as a way to figure it all out is to beat it out of someone. We know where Itachi is going to be in 2 days, it's time to go after him, Sasuke. You're ready?" I nodded and I steadied myself. I had to pick my team. Tsunade said, "I'll have a team ready tomorrow morning, rest until then." I went home, and I tried, but to no avail, sleep escaped me. The next morning, a gigantic team was waiting at the gates. Kakashi, Yamato, Sakura, Yugito, Shino, Kiba, and his sister Hana. I looked them over and I said, "Our mission is to find, interrogate and kill Itachi Uchiha. He is in one of the Uchiha hideouts, right about now. Let's go." Kakashi summoned his dogs and we all split up, each group going to an Uchiha base. Eventually I stopped running to rest and I heard leaves rustle behind me. I turned and saw Naruto. "We need to talk, Naruto," I said, "about what you're doing and about your true allegiances." He mumbled something and drew his sword. He touched his blade and wind chakra filled it and extended its blade. He blurred behind me and swept it down. I jumped forward, turned and punched. He dodged just barely and cut my Achilles tendon with his blade. I kicked it out of his hand somehow in the process. He jumped back and threw 5 tri-pronged kunai at me. I deflected them all and he narrowed his eyes. He formed then shadow clones and had 5 circle me while the other 5 stopped moving entirely. Red rings formed around his eyes and he dispelled his clones and opened his eyes to reveal yellow irises and horizontal oval pupils. He punched at me and I felt it even though he missed. He punched at me and hit this time, and I felt like I had gotten hit by a freight train. When I opened my eyes, he was standing over me, looking down. He had his sword and it was at my neck. He had beaten me utterly. It was beyond irritating. He hesitated and I shot 10 dragon flames into the sky. I jumped up and dodged his next few attempts at my life, and once the thunderheads had formed, I channeled chakra into my right hand, and I shouted, lightning style, "Kirin, the thunderclap." The jutsu rushed down and struck him in a flash of blue, with highlights of yellow. I heard someone whistle. Naruto was next to me, totally unscathed. He asked, "You can't do that again, can you? That would be pretty ridiculous." I was speechless, and Naruto shrugged and raised his hand and began to form a jutsu, when an arm caught his. It was Itachi's partner, from all those years ago, the Shark Man. "This isn't like you, Naruto," he said. "Itachi has a plan, stick with it. You know better. Itachi doesn't look or sound mad, but I would be careful in your position." Naruto tore his hand from the Shark Man's grip. He snapped, "What are you doing here, Kisame?" Kisame rolled his eyes and said, "Preventing you from doing what you were going to do a second ago, and the leader wants to see you. After all, Hinata caught the 7 tails only minutes ago. You go, I'll deal with Itachi's little brother." "Don't talk about me like I'm not here," I shouted, and Kisame looked at me with a very scary smile. It sent chills down my spine. Kisame said, "Oh, I won't hurt you. Itachi made special care to ask me not to. Oh, and before I forget, Naruto?" Naruto looked at him. "I would make sure you put out that fire on your robe." "Oh, fuck," he shouted and tore off his robes. Underneath he wore a similar outfit to the one he had always worn, but instead of blue, there was black. He stomped on his robes and took off. Kisame threw me over his shoulder and took me away from the battle site. He found the Konoha camp and tossed me down by the campfire. Everyone stared and Kisame puffed away. Sakura set to healing me immediately, and I didn't make eye contact with anybody else there. They were all fine, not a scratch on them, but I had gotten my ass handed to me, yet again.